cold seeped through the thin fabric of my trousers, a damp chill crawling from the forest floor into my bones. Moonlight, sharp and unforgiving as shattered glass, cut through the canopy, illuminating the ring of wolves that held us captive. They were not wolves of the wild, but men, warriors in their shifted forms, their massive bodies radiating a heat that warred with the night air. Their scents were a suffocating wall of pine, wet earth, and controlled aggression. Humiliation burned hotter than the cold, a flush of shame crawling up my neck as I knelt in the dirt. My son Elias pressed trembling against my back. His small heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my spine, a terrified drumbeat in the sudden, dreadful silence. I was prey, cornered and exposed, and the hunter, the alpha of all alphas, stood before us. Varian Croven. He was a looming shadow, a king carved from granite and fury, his presence so immense it seemed to suck the very air from my lungs. The scent of him, ozone, ancient stone, and a terrifying possessive musk that was his alone, was a ghost on my tongue, a memory I had spent 5 years trying to burn away. His silver eyes, glowing with the moon's power, were not on me. They were fixed on the small dark-haired boy clutching my tunic, and in their depths, a storm of recognition and raw, unearthed fury gathered. He knew. The impossible truth was written on my son's face, in the defiant set of his small jaw, in the faint silver flecks in his wide, frightened eyes. This was not just a rogue she-wolf and her pup he had cornered. This was a reckoning. His gaze finally lifted to mine, and the fragile peace I had built in the wilderness shattered into a million pieces. The king had found his heir, and in doing so he had found the woman he'd destroyed. His voice, when it came, was not a king's command, but a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the ground. You ran. The accusation was a physical blow. My head snapped up, a bitter laugh dying in my throat. You cast me out, I shot back, my voice shaking with a rage I thought had long turned to ash. My arm tightened around Elias, shielding him, hiding him from the weight of that powerful gaze. You stood before the pack, before the elders, and declared me unworthy. You left me with nothing. Nothing. The word was a snarl. Varian took a step forward, the sheer force of his will pressing down on me. His elite guard shifted, their claws scraping against stone, their growls a low rumble of warning, but Varian's focus was absolute. I gave you my blood, my heir, and you hid him from me. To protect him, I cried, desperation fraying the edges of my voice. From you, from a father who would deny his own child before he was even born. A muscle jumped in his jaw, a flicker of something dark and painful crossing his features. It was not the cold indifference I remembered. This was something else, something raw and wounded. The moon's blessing was silent, Orlina. The rites failed. The elders declared the union cursed. And you believed them, I whispered, the old wound tearing open anew. You believed the whispers of a curse over the bond we shared, over the life growing inside me. I looked down at the top of Elias's head, his dark hair soft against my chin. He has never been a curse. He has been my only blessing. Varian's eyes softened for a barest fraction of a second as he looked at our son. The fury receded, replaced by a deep, aching chasm of loss. It was an expression I had never seen on his face, and it unsettled me more than his anger. He took another step, dropping to one knee so he was closer to our level. The movement was shockingly fluid for a man his size, predatorily graceful. He ignored me completely, his attention solely on the boy. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice stripped of its royal command, leaving only a rough, quiet timbre. Elias pressed his face harder into my back, his small hands twisting the fabric of my shirt. I felt his fear, a sharp metallic tang in the air. "Tell him, my love," I murmured, my hands stroking his hair. "Be brave." A tiny, muffled voice answered. "Elias, Elias, Varas," Varian repeated, the name a strange and holy thing on his tongue. "That is a strong name." He held out a hand, palm up. It was a large hand, scarred and calloused from battle and rule, yet the gesture was one of peace, an offering. I am Varian. I am your father. The confession hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. My breath caught in my chest. To hear it spoken aloud, to have the secret I guarded with my life laid bare in the heart of the forest, was like being struck by lightning. Suddenly, a new scent cut through the tension, acrid and disapproving. An older wolf, his fur more gray than black, shifted back into his human form. He was tall and gaunt, his face a mask of stern lines. Lord Valerius, the head of Varian's council, his eyes, cold and calculating, swept over me with disdain before landing on Elias. "My king," Valerius said, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "A word, if I may. This is a complication. The succession is settled. To bring this wild-born child into the court now, with no proof but a scent on the wind and the word of a rejected female." Varian did not even turn his head. A low growl started in his chest, a seismic tremor that made the very ground vibrate. "Be silent, Valerius, or I will silence you." "But the scandal," the councilman pressed, his voice rising in pitch. "The alliances that hang in the balance. The northern packs will see this as a sign of weakness, of sentiment. This boy is a bastard born in exile. He has no claim." "He has my blood," Varian snarled, finally turning to face his councilman. He rose to his full, towering height, and the alpha power that radiated from him was a physical force. The air crackled. The guards flattened themselves to the ground, whining in submission. Even Valerius, for all his arrogance, bowed his head, his body trembling. "He is the firstborn of my line. He has more claim than any of you." His gaze swung back to me, pinning me in place. The brief moment of vulnerability was gone, replaced by the unyielding iron of the Alpha King. He was no longer a man discovering his son. He was a monarch securing his dynasty. "You will come with me," he commanded. It was not a request. "Both of you, you will return to the capital." "No," I said, the word tasting like rebellion and terror. I scrambled backwards, pulling Elias with me. "We won't. We have a life here." "You have an existence," he corrected, his voice dangerously soft. "Hiding in the shadows, living off scraps, looking over your shoulder. I am offering him a kingdom. I am offering him his birthright." "And what are you offering me?" I challenged, my heart pounding against my ribs. "A gilded cage? The contempt of your court? The scorn of every wolf who remembers the day you threw me away?" He closed the distance between us in 2 long strides. His shadow fell over us, a chilling eclipse. He crouched before me again, so close I could feel the heat rolling off his skin, see the intricate silver patterns in his irises. His scent was intoxicating, a primal lure my body remembered even if my mind screamed in protest. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a loose strand of hair from my face. The touch was electric, a jolt of forbidden lightning that shot straight through me. "I am offering you my protection," he murmured, his voice a low, possessive rumble that vibrated deep in my soul. His eyes dropped to my throat, to the place where an alpha's claiming mark should have been. And so much more. My wolf, the beast I had kept chained and silent for 5 long years, stirred within me. It whined, recognizing its mate, its alpha, its king. It wanted to submit, to lean into his touch, to believe the promise in his hypnotic gaze. But the woman, the mother, remembered the cold sting of rejection, the lonely nights, the terror of raising a child alone. "I don't want your protection," I lied, my voice barely a whisper. A slow, predatory smile touched his lips. "You will." He rose, turning his back to me to face his men. "Make camp. We rest here for the night. No one is to touch them. No one is to speak to them. They are under my personal watch." The warriors bowed their heads in silent assent. Valerius shot me a look of pure venom before turning away to organize the patrol. In moments, the tense standoff had become a royal encampment, with me and my son at its heart. the most precious and volatile of prisoners. Varian walked to the edge of the clearing, staring out into the dark woods that had been my sanctuary. I watched his broad back, the powerful lines of his shoulders, the way he held himself with the innate certainty of a man born to rule. He had shattered my world for a second time, once with rejection and now with this possessive reclamation. I clutched Elias tighter, my mind racing. I had to escape. Before the sun rose, before he could drag us back to a life that would surely destroy us both. As if sensing my thoughts, he turned his head, his profile sharp against the moonlight. His voice carried across the clearing, low and laced with an unbreakable command, a promise that froze the blood in my veins. Don't even think about it, Orlina. There is no forest deep enough, no mountain high enough to hide you from me this time. You are mine, the boy is mine. Your running days are over. His words hung in the air, a cage of sound snapping shut around me. The forest, my home, my sanctuary, suddenly felt alien and hostile. Every whispering leaf, every snapping twig was a sentry in Varian's service. The warriors moved with quiet efficiency, their dark forms melting into the shadows to establish a perimeter. A fire was kindled, its hungry flames clawing at the darkness, casting flickering, distorted shadows that danced like ghosts. The scent of wood smoke, usually a comfort, was now the smell of my captivity. I pulled Elias closer, my body a shield, my mind a whirlwind of frantic, useless plans. Run where? He was the Alpha King. His territory was the world. My son stirred against me, his small body shivering not just from fear, but from the encroaching cold. His stomach rumbled, a small, pathetic sound in the charged silence. A fresh wave of fury and helplessness washed over me. I could hunt. I could find shelter. I had kept us alive and warm and fed for 5 years on my own terms. But kneeling here, surrounded by the king's power, I was as useless as a newborn pup. Varian approached, his heavy boots making almost no sound on the damp earth. He carried 2 thick furs, rich and dark, and a steaming water skin. He stopped a few feet away, his presence a palpable weight. He wasn't looking at me with the cold authority of a king, but with an unnerving intensity, as if he were trying to map the 5 years of hardship he saw etched onto my face. "He's cold," Varian stated, his voice a low rumble. He held out one of the furs. "Take this." "We're fine," I snapped, my pride a flimsy shield. "Don't be a fool, Orlina. Your defiance will not keep him warm." He took a step closer, and my wolf whined. A traitorous sound of submission deepened my chest. I hated it. I hated him for being able to draw it out of me. He knelt, not in supplication, but as a predator lowering its center of gravity. He laid the fur on the ground beside me, its lush thickness a silent accusation against the thin, worn blanket I had for Elias. He offered the water skin. "It's broth, rabbit." My stomach clenched. We hadn't eaten since morning. Elias's head lifted, his small nose twitching at the rich, savory scent. His wide, silver-flecked eyes, so much like his father's, stared at the skin with a longing that broke my heart. It was one thing for me to suffer for my pride, but another entirely to make my child suffer with me. My hand trembled as I reached out and took it. Our fingers brushed. A jolt, white-hot and immediate, shot up my arm. I flinched back as if burned, snatching the water skin from his grasp. Varian's eyes darkened, a flicker of something, memory, regret, possession, in their silver depths. He remembered the fire that had once burned between us. He knew I felt it too. I carefully tipped the warm liquid to Elias's lips. He drank greedily, his small hands clutching the skin. Varian watched, his expression unreadable. "I would not have let you starve," he said quietly, the words meant for me alone. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Wouldn't you? You let my spirit starve. You let my heart break. You let me walk out of the great hall with your child in my belly, and you did nothing. Forgive me if I don't trust your sudden benevolence." "It was not benevolence," he growled, the kingly mask slipping back into place. He is my son. I provide for what is mine. He is not a possession Varian. He is a person, a boy who has known only peace and the love of his mother. You want to drag him into a world of politics and betrayal, a world that will chew him up and spit him out. I want to give him the world he was born to rule, he countered, his jaw tight. A world you stole from him. I saved him, I hissed, my voice cracking. I wrapped the fur Varian had offered around Elias's shaking shoulders. The warmth was immediate, a sinfully comforting embrace. It felt like a surrender. The elders called him a curse. Your council would have seen him as a threat. What would you have done, huh? Hidden him away in some remote corner of the kingdom, a dirty little secret to protect your alliances? The muscle in his jaw jumped. He looked away toward the fire, and for a moment the iron certainty in his posture faltered. I don't know, he admitted, the words sounding torn from his throat. The pressure from the council, the failed right. Valerius argued that a union unblessed by the moon was a weakness the other clans would exploit. He said it would invite war. It was the closest he'd ever come to an explanation. Not an excuse, but a glimpse into the political machinations that had cost me everything. It wasn't enough. So you chose war over your own child? I whispered, the accusation hanging between us. Before he could answer, Lord Valerius approached, his movements stiff with disapproval. He cleared his throat, a dry, grating sound. My king, the perimeter is secure. Your tent is prepared. His gaze slid to me, cold and dismissive. We have a smaller tent for the, female and her pup. The word pup was an insult, a deliberate attempt to dehumanize my son, to reduce him to a mere animal. My back stiffened. Varian rose slowly, turning to face his councilman. The difference in their stature was immense. Varian was a mountain of muscle and power. Valerius was a withered tree. They will stay with me, Varian commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Valerius's eyes widened in shock. My king, it is inappropriate. The scandal is already a fire we must stamp out. To shelter her in your own tent, it implies a familiarity, a status she does not possess. She is an unmated rogue. A growl, low and visceral, rumbled in Varian's chest. It was the sound of a storm gathering on a distant horizon. She is the mother of my heir, and you will address her with the respect that title demands, or you will not address her at all. Do you understand me, Valerius? The old wolf's face paled. He bowed his head low, the gesture reeking of fear and simmering resentment. Yes, Alpha King. He backed away, melting back into the shadows, but I could feel his hateful gaze on me, a physical weight of malice. He was an enemy and a dangerous one. Varian turned back to me, his expression softening slightly. You and Elias will be safer with me. Safer? I scoffed. You are the greatest danger here. He ignored my protest. He bent and before I could react, scooped Elias into his arms. My son, sleepy from the warm broth and wrapped in the heavy fur, barely stirred. He mumbled in his sleep, his head falling to rest against Varian's broad shoulder, against the chest of the father he'd never known. The sight was a dagger in my heart. It was so painfully natural, so right, and yet so deeply wrong. This was the scene I had dreamed of in my loneliest moments, and now seeing it manifest, it felt like a betrayal of the life I had built for us. Varian looked down at the boy in his arms, and the fierce, possessive mask of the king dissolved, leaving behind a look of such profound, aching wonder that it stole the breath from my lungs. He gently brushed a lock of dark hair from Elias's forehead. It was the gesture of a father who had missed every milestone, every scraped knee, every first word. A father who was now determined to miss nothing else. Come, he said, his voice soft but firm. He needs to rest properly. He turned and walked toward the largest of the hastily erected tents, a dark canvas structure set apart from the others. I was left with a choice. Follow him into the lion's den, or stay out here in the cold, proving a point to no one but myself. My legs, stiff and trembling, carried me forward. I followed the scent of my son, the scent of his father, into the suffocating intimacy of the king's tent. In that, it was surprisingly sparse. A thick bedroll of furs dominated one side, a small folding table with maps held down by daggers on the other. A single lantern cast a warm, golden glow. Varian laid Elias down on the furs with a tenderness that seemed at odds with the warrior I knew him to be. He covered him carefully, his large hands gentle and sure. I stood awkwardly by the tent flap, my arms wrapped around myself, feeling like an intruder. The space was filled with Varian's scent, ozone, stone, and that unique masculine musk that made my senses heighten and my blood run faster. It was everywhere. It was inescapable. He straightened up and turned to me. The tent felt impossibly small with both of us inside it. The air was thick with unspoken words, with 5 years of pain and anger and a primal, undeniable attraction that crackled between us like static electricity. "Why did you never try to contact me?" he asked, his voice low. "What would have been the point?" I retorted, my defenses snapping back into place. "To beg? To plead with the king who publicly shamed me? I have more pride than that." "This isn't about pride, Orlena. It's about my son," he growled, taking a step toward me. "I had a right to know he existed. You gave up that right when you listened to your counsel instead of your own heart." I shot back, taking a defiant step forward to meet him. We were inches apart now, the heat from his body washing over me. "When you saw the silent moon ritual, not as a mystery to be solved, but as an excuse to discard me, tell me, Varian, did you even look for me?" His silver eyes wavered, a shadow of guilt, deep and stark, passed through them. "For a time," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. But the northern borders were in turmoil. The Stone River Pack was threatening rebellion. Valerius convinced me that searching for a disgraced female was a distraction I could not afford. His confession was meant to be an explanation, but it felt like another betrayal. He had chosen his kingdom over me, over us, again. "So you simply forgot," I finished for him, my voice flat and dead. "No," he said, his gaze locking with mine. It was fierce, burning with an emotion I couldn't name. "I never forgot." He reached out, his hand hovering in the air between us for a heartbeat, before his fingers came to rest on my neck, right over my pulse point. His thumb stroked the sensitive skin, sending a shiver down my entire body. His touch was proprietary, a brand of heat against my cold skin. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "I feel your heart," he murmured, his voice a hypnotic thrum that vibrated through the point of contact. "It beats with the same fire it always did." His eyes narrowed, a strange calculating light entering them. "You wear no moonstone. The amulet I gave you at our pledging ceremony, where is it?" I jerked my head back, trying to break the contact, but his grip was gentle yet firm. "I threw it in the river the day I left," I spat. "It was a symbol of a promise you broke." A dark, dangerous smile touched his lips, a smile that did not reach his eyes. "A promise the moon broke, not I." He leaned in closer, his breath warm against my ear, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, chilling whisper. "You think that amulet was just a trinket? A symbol? It was a key, Orlena, a conduit. Without it, the claiming mark will not settle. The final bond can never be forged." My blood ran cold, a claiming mark, the permanent bite scar that sealed a true mating, physically and magically binding two wolves for eternity. It was the one thing he had never given me, the final step that had been forestalled by the failed rite. His thumb moved from my pulse to the hollow of my throat, pressing gently against the place where his mark should have been. The phantom touch sent a shockwave of longing and terror through me. All this time he breathed, his silver eyes glowing with a terrifying, possessive light. "You have been running from a bond that was never even completed. Now we will have the chance to finish what we started." His words were a brand, searing into the soft flesh of my throat where his thumb rested. Finish what we started. A cold dread, sharp and absolute, cut through the haze of shock and unwilling arousal. I found my strength in that fear. My hand flew up, shoving hard against his chest, a slab of unyielding muscle and heat. "Don't you touch me!" I snarled, my voice a ragged tear in the silence of the tent. To my surprise, he let me go. He took a step back, breaking the suffocating proximity, but his silver eyes held me captive. They burned with a possessive fire that promised this was only a temporary reprieve. He was a patient hunter who had already cornered his prey. He could afford to wait. The bond between us is not a memory, Orlina. It is a living, breathing thing. It is a debt of blood and bone, and it will be paid, he said, his voice dropping back into that low, resonant timbre that my wolf instinctively yearned for. You can fight me. You can hate me. It will not change what you are, what he is, what we are meant to be. He turned away, giving me his back as he checked on Elias, adjusting the furs around our sleeping son. The casual intimacy of the gesture, the sheer arrogance of his certainty, sent a fresh wave of rage through me. He spoke of destiny as if it were a weapon he could wield, a chain he could use to bind me to him. I sank onto a pile of spare pelts near the tent's entrance, as far from him and the warm nest of his bedroll as I could get. I would not sleep. I would watch him, a sentinel guarding the last vestiges of my freedom. The night wore on, a long, silent battle of wills. I watched the steady rise and fall of his chest as he sat meditating by the low-burning lantern, his powerful form radiating a calm that was more unnerving than any outburst. He was a king. He was accustomed to long vigils, to waiting, to winning. My eyelids grew heavy, my body screaming for rest, but I fought it. Every time my head nodded, his scent, that intoxicating, infuriating mix of ozone and stone, would drift over, pulling me back to sharp, resentful awareness. Dawn came not with a gentle light, but with the sounds of a war party breaking camp. The clink of metal, the low murmur of orders, the snorting of horses. It was the sound of my walled world being dismantled. Elias stirred, his small body stretching under the furs. He sat up, his dark hair a mess, his silver-flecked eyes blinking in confusion at the strange canvas ceiling. His gaze found Varian first. My son, who had never known a man's presence in our lives, simply stared, his expression one of pure childish curiosity. There was no fear. Varian, who had been watching him, offered a small, hesitant smile. It was a look so unguarded, so foreign on his stern face, that it momentarily disarmed me. "Good morning, Elias," he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. Elias clutched the fur to his chest. "Who are you?" he whispered, the question blunt and innocent. My heart twisted. Varian's smile faltered, the brief light in his eyes dimming. The weight of his 5-year absence was summed up in that simple, devastating question. "I am Varian," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm your father." He held out a piece of dried meat. "Are you hungry?" My son's eyes darted to me, seeking permission, seeking guidance. I wanted to scream, to snatch him up and run. But where? I gave a tight, almost imperceptible nod. He was hungry, and I would not deny him. Elias scrambled out of the bedroll and cautiously approached Varian, taking the offered food with a mumbled, "Thank you." I watched them, a spectator to my own life's unraveling. Varian spoke to him in low tones, asking about the forest, about the animals he knew. He listened with an intensity I had once mistaken for love, his entire being focused on the small boy who was a miniature, softer version of himself. And Elias, my shy, quiet boy, began to talk, his voice growing stronger as he described the squirrels he'd named and the best places to find river stones. A cold, bitter jealousy curled in my gut. This was Varian's power. Not just the brute force of an alpha king, but this magnetic gravitational pull that could charm a frightened child and command the loyalty of warriors. He was claiming my son not with threats, but with simple paternal attention, and it was a far more dangerous weapon. When it was time to leave, a warrior brought 3 horses. One was Varian's, a massive black war horse that radiated the same intimidating energy as its master. The other 2 were smaller. Valerius appeared at Varian's side, his lips a thin, disapproving line. "My king, the she-wolf, can ride with one of the guards," he said, avoiding my eyes. "It is more secure." "She rides with me," Varian commanded without looking at him. His gaze was on me. "You and the boy. Both of you." "I can ride my own horse," I insisted, stepping toward one of the smaller mounts. "No." The word was absolute. He swung himself into the saddle of his war horse with practiced ease, the leather groaning under his weight. He looked down at me, his position of power absolute. "I will not have you out of my sight, and I will not risk the boy. You will ride with me." He held a hand down to me, an order disguised as an offer. To refuse would be to make a scene, to frighten Elias further. To accept felt like placing the shackle on my own wrist. With burning cheeks, I placed my hand in his. His grip was firm, calloused, and sent a familiar jolt through my veins. He lifted me as if I weighed nothing, setting me in the saddle before him. Another guard handed Elias up to me, and I settled my son in my lap, his small body a fragile barrier between my back and Varian's hard chest. The moment his arms came around us to take the reins, I felt the trap snap shut. I was enveloped by him. His body heat soaked into my back, a stark contrast to the crisp morning air. His scent was a thick, heady cloud, filling my lungs with every breath. I could feel the powerful muscles of his chest and abdomen against my spine, the steady, slow beat of his heart a drum against my shoulder blades. It was a torturous, intimate prison. My wolf purred, the traitorous beast reveling in the proximity to its mate. I gritted my teeth, focusing on the stiff line of my spine, on the anger that was my only armor. The party moved out, a column of dark, silent warriors flanking us. We rode through the forest that had been my refuge, its familiar paths now trampled by the king's procession. Elias, caught up in the novelty of the ride, was a bundle of excited energy in my arms, pointing out landmarks only he and I knew. "That's the crooked oak where the owls live, Mama. And there's the stream where we catch fish." Each excited cry was a fresh stab of pain. He did not understand what we were losing. Varian's chest rumbled with a low chuckle behind me. "You taught him the woods well," he murmured, his voice a vibration that passed directly into my bones. "I taught him to survive," I corrected, my voice sharp. "I will teach him to rule." The finality in his tone sent a chill down my spine. We rode for hours. Just as the sun reached its zenith, a sudden sharp scent cut through the air, blood, fear, and the unmistakable musk of rogue wolves. Varian's body went rigid behind me. His arm tightened around my waist, pulling me and Elias flush against him in a single protective motion. "Halt!" his voice boomed, no longer a quiet murmur, but the full-throated command of the Alpha King. The entire column stopped instantly. From the dense undergrowth to our left, 3 large wolves emerged. They were lean and scarred, their pelts matted with dirt and old blood. Their yellow eyes burned with feral hunger, and their lips were curled back to reveal stained teeth. Rogues, outcasts, desperate and therefore dangerous. They had smelled our party, smelled me, an unmarked female, and the pup. To them we were a challenge, a potential prize. Varian's guards instantly formed a defensive circle, their hands on the hilts of their swords, their own wolves rising to the surface. But Varian did not draw a weapon. He simply sat taller in his saddle, his presence swelling, his power rolling off him in palpable, suffocating waves. A low growl started in his chest. It was not the sound of an animal, but the sound of the earth splitting open, of mountains grinding together. It was a sound of absolute primal dominance. The 3 rogues faltered. They whined, their ears flattening against their skulls. The largest one, the leader, took a hesitant step back. its belly low to the ground in a sign of submission. They had not realized who they were challenging. They had scented a prize, but they had stumbled upon a god. Varian did not speak. He did not need to. He simply unleashed the full force of his alpha will upon them. I felt it as a crushing pressure, a force that demanded obedience, that stripped away all thought of defiance. Elias whimpered, burying his face in my tunic. Even I, who was bound to him, felt the urge to lower my head, to expose my throat. The rogues broke. With terrified yelps, they turned and fled, crashing through the undergrowth in a desperate, panicked retreat. Silence descended once more, thick and heavy. The air still crackled with the residue of Varian's power. His arm was still a band of iron around me. He leaned forward, his lips brushing against my ear. "Now you see," he whispered, his voice a low, possessive growl that sent a tremor of fear and a contrary, shameful thrill through me. "That is the world you were living in. That is the danger I pulled you from. Out here, you are prey. With me, you are safe." He nudged the warhorse forward, and the party resumed its march, leaving the scene behind as if nothing had happened. But something had. I had just witnessed the raw, untamed power of the Alpha King. He hadn't needed a sword or an army. He had defeated the threat with his will alone. He was right. He had saved us, and that single undeniable truth was more terrifying than any cage. He was binding me to him not just with force, but with a debt of blood and bone. By late afternoon, the trees began to thin. Ahead, I saw the harsh geometric lines of a stone wall, a watchtower flying a banner with the emblem of a snarling wolf's head against a gray field. We were leaving the wild behind. We were entering his domain. The massive iron-banded gates groaned open for us. As we rode into the courtyard of the fortified outpost, the men and women within, soldiers, servants, traders, all stopped what they were doing. They stared. First, they fell to their knees in reverence for their king. Then their eyes lifted to see me and my son, held in his embrace. Whispers erupted like wildfire, a low, sibilant hiss that followed us across the stone yard. I saw the shock, the disapproval, the naked, scornful curiosity on their faces. I was the ghost from the past, the rejected Luna, returned with a secret heir in her arms. I was a scandal made flesh. We halted in the center of the courtyard. Varian dismounted, then reached up for Elias. As he swung our son to the ground, Lord Valerius appeared at his side, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. He bowed deeply to Varian, but his cold reptilian eyes were fixed on me. "Welcome home, my king," Valerius said, his voice just loud enough for me to hear over the whispers of the crowd. Then he leaned closer to Varian, his voice dropping to a venomous murmur that was clearly intended for me. "A word of caution, my lord. The capital is not the forest. Tongues are sharper than teeth here. Some stains, once set, can never be truly washed away." Valerius's words were a poison dart, aimed not at the king, but straight at my heart. Some stains can never be truly washed away. I flinched as if struck. The whispers in the courtyard intensified, a chorus of judgment that echoed the councilman's venom. They weren't just seeing a rogue and her pup. They were seeing a walking, breathing scandal, a blight on their Alpha King's pristine reign. My son, my beautiful, innocent Elias, was being reduced to a stain. A raw, protective fury, hotter than any shame, surged through me. My hand tightened on Elias's shoulder, my nails digging into the worn fabric of his tunic. Before I could utter a single word, Varian moved. It was not a king's deliberate stride, but the lightning-fast strike of a predator. His hand shot out and clamped around Valerius's forearm, his fingers digging into the old wolf's flesh. The sound of bone grinding under the pressure was sickeningly audible. Valerius let out a strangled gasp, his face contorting in pain and shock, his mask of smug superiority shattering. "The only stain I see here, Valerius," Varian growled, his voice a low, lethal vibration that silenced the entire courtyard. "Is the disloyalty seeping from your pores?" His silver eyes were chips of ice, glowing with a deadly light. "She is Orlena Mylora, of the bloodline that has guarded the Mooncairns for 1,000 years, and this child," he gestured with his free hand to Elias, a sweeping proprietary motion, "is my firstborn son and heir. Anyone who refers to either of them with anything less than the honor they are due will answer to me, personally." He released Valerius's arm with a shove, sending the older wolf stumbling back. The message was brutally clear. The hierarchy had been re-established. I was no longer a discarded rogue. I was the mother of the heir, and under the king's explicit, violent protection. The crowd went silent, their scornful curiosity instantly replaced by fear. They bowed their heads, not daring to meet Varian's gaze. He scanned the yard, his eyes promising retribution, before his focus returned to me. He lifted Elias from my arms and set him gently on the ground, then offered me a hand to help me dismount. I ignored it, sliding off the warhorse on my own. I would not be seen as a damsel needing his aid, not in front of all these hostile eyes. He didn't comment on the slight. He simply placed a hand on the small of my back, a gesture that was both supportive and possessive, and guided us toward the keep's main entrance. "You and the boy need to rest. You're exhausted." His touch was a brand of heat through my tunic. I wanted to shrug it off, but I was acutely aware of the dozens of eyes still secretly watching. To show dissent now would be to show weakness, to undermine the very authority he had just used to defend us. So I endured it, my body rigid, as he led us into the stone fortress. The air inside was thick with the scent of beeswax, wood smoke, and old power. Tapestries depicting great hunts and ancient battles hung on the cold stone walls, muffling our footsteps. Servants flattened themselves against the walls as we passed, their eyes downcast. No one looked at me. It was a different kind of shunning than the open scorn of my old pack. It was a fearful, calculated erasure. Varian led us up a winding staircase to a suite of rooms. They were luxurious, with a large canopied bed, a roaring fireplace, and windows overlooking a manicured garden. A young servant girl, barely a woman, stood trembling by the hearth. "My king," she stammered, curtsying so low her forehead nearly touched her knees. "Prepare a bath for the lady and the young lord," Varian commanded. "And bring food, hot broth, bread, cheese, and milk for my son." He said it so easily, my son. Each time, the words staked a deeper claim. The girl scurried away, casting a wide-eyed, terrified glance at me as she left. When she returned with other servants to haul in a large copper tub and buckets of steaming, herb-scented water, they moved with the same silent, fearful efficiency. They would not meet my gaze. To them, I was a ghost, a dangerous omen. The stain Valerius had spoken of. Varian dismissed them with a wave of his hand. He turned to me, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. "I will see to my commanders. Get some rest, both of you." He paused at the door. "No one will bother you. You are safe here." Then he was gone, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind him, leaving me and Elias in a gilded cage. "Mama," Elias whispered, his voice small in the cavernous room. "Why were those people looking at us like that?" I knelt and pulled him into a fierce hug, burying my face in his hair. How could I explain court politics, shame, and legitimacy to a 5-year-old? "Because they are unused to people from the forest," I said, the lie tasting like ash. "They are shy." I bathed him first, scrubbing the grime of the road from his skin. He splashed in the hot water, a child's simple joy. A balm to my frayed nerves. As I washed his hair, he looked up at me, his eyes serious. "Is he Varian? Is he going to be our alpha now?" The question struck me with the force of a physical blow. In our small world of two, I had been the alpha. The hunter, the protector, the leader. Now, in a single day, Elias's world had been tilted on its axis. He sensed the shift in power, the change in the very air we breathed. "He is your father, my love," I said, my voice strained. That is all you need to worry about for now. After I settled a clean, drowsy Elias into the mountain of furs and pillows on the bed, I sank into the hot water myself. The heat was a shock, leaching the deep, bone-weary cold from my limbs. I scrubbed my own skin raw, as if I could wash away Varian's scent, the feel of his hands on me, the stain of the courtyard's judgment. I put on the clothes that had been left for me, a simple tunic and trousers of soft, dark wool. They were clean and warm, but they felt foreign, constricting. They smelled of the keep, not of me. I was sitting by the fire, watching Elias sleep, when the door opened again. It was Varian. He had shed his heavy leather armor and wore only dark trousers and a simple linen shirt that did little to conceal the formidable power of his chest and shoulders. He moved to the table and poured 2 goblets of wine. He brought one to me. "Drink," he said, "not a request." I took it, my fingers brushing his. The spark was still there, an infuriating, undeniable current. I took a long swallow of the dark, rich wine, hoping it would dull the edges of my fear. We stood in silence for a long moment, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the soft breathing of our son. "What Valerius said," I began, my voice low and tight. "He is not the only one who thinks it. I saw their faces. I am a contamination in your perfect, orderly world." "My world is anything but perfect and orderly," he countered, his voice a low growl. He stared into the flames, his profile harsh and shadowed. "And you are not a contamination. You are a reckoning." "A reckoning for what?" I demanded, turning to face him fully. "For a crime I never committed? I am tired of whispers and shadows, Varian. I want the truth. Tell me what happened that night, the night of the moon's blessing. Tell me why you felt nothing." His jaw clenched. For a moment I thought he would refuse, that he would retreat behind his kingly mask. But then he let out a long, slow breath, a sound of profound weariness. "You think I felt nothing?" he asked, his voice raw. He set his goblet down with a heavy thud. "Gods, Orlina, if only it were that simple." He began to pace before the fire, a caged wolf. "I felt the bond. I felt it the moment I first saw you. It was a fire in my blood. Every instinct I had screamed that you were my mate, my Luna, my queen." He stopped and turned to me, his silver eyes blazing with the memory. "That night, we stood on the precipice. The elders were chanting. The moonlight was so bright it was like day. I reached for you to complete the rite, to give you the claiming mark." He trailed off, his gaze becoming distant, haunted. "And," I prompted, my heart hammering, "and when the final blessing was to be bestowed, when the power of the goddess was supposed to flood into me, to sanctify the bond and make it permanent." There was a void. He shook his head, a dark, troubled motion. "It wasn't just silence, Orlina. It wasn't an absence of power. It was an active, aggressive cold. A wall of ice slammed down between us. It felt like the moon herself turned her face away, a rejection." I stared at him, my mind reeling. I had always imagined it as a simple failure, a lack of a sign, but he was describing it as a judgment, a curse. "I tried to fight it," he continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He took a step closer to me, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "I was the Alpha King. I thought my will alone would be enough. I leaned in to mark you anyway, to claim you, bond or no bond." He stopped, swallowing hard. A flicker of something that looked like fear, a shocking emotion on his face, crossed his features. And a pain, unlike anything I have ever felt, shot through me. It was as if my own soul was being torn in two. Every instinct, every fiber of my being screamed at me to stop. That to mark you against that celestial will would destroy us both. It would have been a blasphemy that shattered the bond forever, leaving nothing but an empty husk. I sank onto the hearthstones, my legs suddenly unable to support me. He had tried. He had tried to claim me, and something had physically, magically stopped him. All these years, I had pictured him as a cold, calculating king, making a political decision. But the man he described was a terrified mate, betrayed by his goddess and his own power at the most crucial moment of his life. The elders saw it, he said, his voice laced with the phantom agony of the memory. They saw me recoil from you. They felt the cold void where the blessing should have been. Valerius, he was the first to call it a curse. Now I understood. It wasn't just politics. It was faith. It was fear of the divine. He hadn't just rejected me. He had bowed to what he believed was the will of the goddess herself. My anger, the righteous fury that had been my shield for 5 years, began to crumble, leaving a raw, aching vulnerability in its place. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not just the king, but the wolf, the mate who had been denied. Instinctively, without thought, I reached out and placed my hand on his arm. His muscles were bunched like cords of steel beneath his shirt. I felt a tremor run through him at my touch. His head snapped down, his gaze locking with mine. The haunted look was gone, replaced by a raw, immediate hunger. The fire between us, banked for 5 long years, roared back to life in an instant. He grabbed my hand, his grip crushing, his thumb stroking the center of my palm. His other hand came up to cup my jaw, forcing me to look at him. His silver eyes were molten, blazing with a desperate, possessive light. That night, the moon denied me, he growled, his voice a low, guttural promise that vibrated through my entire body. He leaned in, his forehead pressing against mine, his scent overwhelming me. She will not deny me again. His breath was a warm promise against my skin. The scent of him, raw and male and irrevocably his, flooded my senses, short-circuiting every rational thought. My body, the ultimate traitor, arched toward him, a flower seeking the sun. The past 5 years of bitterness and survival evaporated in the searing heat of his gaze. There was only this moment, this precipice. His lips, firm and demanding, were a hair's breadth from mine. My own parted in silent, unwilling invitation. My wolf was screaming, a triumphant, desperate howl of homecoming. He was going to claim me, here, now. He was going to finish it. A sharp, violent rap on the heavy oak door shattered the spell. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't the timid tap of a servant. It was the urgent, demanding summons of a warrior. Varian froze. A growl of pure, primal frustration ripped from his chest. A sound so guttural it seemed to shake the very stones of the room. He didn't pull back. For a heart-stopping second, I thought he would ignore it, that he would take what he wanted and damn the consequences. His eyes, molten silver, held mine, a silent war raging within them, the king versus the mate. "My king!" a voice shouted from the other side, muffled but laced with panic. "It is urgent. Lord Valerius has invoked the Elder Council. He demands an immediate conclave of judgment." The words were like a bucket of ice water. Conclave of judgment. It was an ancient, rarely used proceeding, a formal challenge to an alpha's decree. It was one step short of a call for rebellion. The king won. With a final, tortured look that promised this was far from over, Varian pulled away. The loss of his heat was a physical blow, leaving me cold and trembling. He stalked to the door, his body radiating a barely contained fury. He flung it open to reveal a young guard, pale-faced and sweating. "He is challenging the succession," the guard stammered, bowing his head. "He claims the discovery of a wild-born heir from an unblessed union invalidates the treaties with the northern clans. He says it threatens the stability of the entire kingdom." "He threatens his own life," Varian snarled. He turned back to me, his face once again the hard, unyielding mask of the Alpha King. The mate who had almost kissed me, who had confessed his own pain, was gone. "Stay here, bar the door. Do not open it for anyone but me." He swept from the room without a backward glance, his power a turbulent wake behind him. The guard scrambled to follow. The door clicked shut, the sound of the heavy iron bar sliding into place on the other side, echoing the slamming of a cage door. I was a prisoner once more. I stood there for a long moment, my body thrumming with a confusing cocktail of adrenaline, fear, relief, and a sharp, bitter disappointment that shamed me. My fingers rose to touch my lips, which still tingled with the ghost of his proximity. I had been seconds away from surrendering, from letting him brand me, from binding myself to the man who had broken me. I looked over at Elias, sleeping peacefully, his face soft and innocent in the firelight. He was the reason for all of this. The reason Varian had hunted me down. The reason Valerius was staging what amounted to a political coup. And he was the reason I would not be a passive prize in their war. Varian's order to stay, to hide, grated against my every instinct. For 5 years, I had faced every threat myself. I had not cowered in a burrow while predators circled. I would not start now. A cold resolve settled over me. This judgment was not just about Varian's decree or Elias's future. It was about me. I was the unblessed union. I was the stain. I would not let men I did not know debate my worth and my son's life behind a closed door. My old worn tunic and trousers were a crumpled heap by the fire. I pulled them on. The soft wool of the keep's clothes felt like a costume, a disguise. My own clothes, smelling of forest, earth, and wood smoke, were my skin, my armor. I braided my long hair back, my fingers working the strands into a tight, practical plait. I was not the king's sheltered consort. I was Orlina Malora, and I would face my accusers. The door was barred from the outside, but the windows were not. They overlooked a stone parapet, a dizzying drop to the garden below, but to the right, the walkway connected to another tower. It was a risk, but it was a way out. I slipped from the room, my bare feet silent on the cold stone. The night air was sharp, biting at my skin, but it cleared my head. I followed the parapet, pressing myself into the shadows until I found a stairwell leading down into the heart of the keep. I followed the low murmur of voices, the scent of old stone and nervous sweat, to a pair of massive iron-bound doors. They were slightly ajar. Peeking through the crack, I saw the council chamber. It was a stark, intimidating room. A long carved stone table dominated the space, surrounded by a dozen high-backed chairs. Seated in them were the elders, their faces grim and weathered, ancient wolves in human form. At the head of the table, Varian sat upon a throne-like chair, his hands gripping the armrests, his knuckles white, and pacing before them all, his voice a venomous, persuasive hiss, was Valerius. "A bastard born of a cursed union," he was saying, his arm sweeping out in a dramatic gesture. The king's sentimentality clouds his judgment. He asks you to accept this, pup, as your future alpha king, a boy raised by a bitter rogue with no knowledge of our laws, our traditions, our gods. He will be a weak link, an easy target for our enemies. The northern clans will see this as the perfect excuse to break their allegiance. They will smell weakness, and they will attack. An old elder, his face a roadmap of scars, grunted. "The boy has the king's blood. That is the law." "The law is superseded by the will of the moon," Valerius shot back. "And the moon turned her face from this union. We all felt it that night. The silence, the rejection. It was a sign, a warning that this line should not continue. Orlina Malora's blood is tainted." Varian slammed his fist on the stone table. The sound cracked through the chamber like a thunderclap. "You will not speak her name with such disrespect, old wolf. You tread on dangerous ground." "I speak the truth," Valerius cried, turning to the elders, playing his audience. "A truth you are too blinded by loyalty or fear to see. Have you forgotten the histories? Have you forgotten the story of Lyra Malora 2 centuries ago? Orlina's own ancestor. Pledged to the alpha of her time, she too was met with the moon's silence. And why? Because she was a traitor. She conspired with the feral packs of the East, selling pack secrets for power. The moon's silence was not a curse, it was a mark. The mark of a traitor to warn the alpha away from a poisoned bloodline. A wave of murmurs swept through the elders. They looked at each other, their eyes filled with doubt and a dawning horror. Valerius had not just thrown a stone, he had unearthed a tomb. He was using their own faith, their own deepest superstitions, against their king. He had just sentenced me and my son. That was enough. I pushed the door open and strode into the room. A collective gasp went through the chamber. The elders stared as if they had seen a ghost. Valerius froze mid-rant, his mouth agape, his face flushing with fury at my defiance. Varian's head snapped up, his silver eyes widening in shock, then blazing with a complex mixture of anger that I had disobeyed him and a fierce, undeniable pride. I walked until I stood at the foot of the great stone table, my head held high. I was not a warrior, I was not a queen, but I was a mother, and in that moment I felt more powerful than any of them. "You speak of my blood, Lord Valerius," I said, my voice clear and steady, ringing with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "You speak of my ancestors, but you do not know the first thing about them. Or me." I turned my gaze on the elders, meeting each of their stares without flinching. "My name is Orlina Myalora. For 1,000 years my family has guarded the moon cairns. We do not conspire with feral packs. We are lore keepers. We are tenders of the old ways, the ways many of you have forgotten in your stone keeps and your political games." I took a breath, my voice dropping, filled with the weight of my own truth. "You speak of the moon's silence as a mark of shame, a curse. But you are wrong. I have lived under that silence for 5 years. I have raised my son under it. And I have learned things in the wild that you cannot learn from scrolls and histories." I looked directly at Varian, my words for him alone, though the entire room listened, rapt. "The moon is a mother. She does not curse children. She protects them," Valerius scoffed, recovering his voice. "Protection? She abandoned you. She left you unmated, unclaimed." "No," I said, a sudden startling clarity washing over me, a truth that felt as if it had been whispered into my soul. I turned back to the smirking councilman. "She did not abandon me. She protected me from a pack that would have cast out my child, from a council that would have called him a bastard, and from an alpha who, in that moment—" My eyes found Varian's again, my voice softening with a painful dawning understanding, was not yet strong enough to choose his mate over his politics. The accusation, gentle as it was, hit Varian like a physical blow. The truth of it was stark and ugly, reflected in the sudden pain that flashed in his eyes. He stood up, his chair scraping against the stone floor. He was no longer looking at Valerius or the elders. He was looking only at me, a sense of awe and dawning horror on his face, as if he were seeing the whole world in a new light. "The legend of Lyra," he breathed, the words coming slowly as a new interpretation dawned on him. "The histories say that the alpha she was pledged to was weak, that he was controlled by his council, that he was about to sign a treaty that would have decimated his people." He looked at Valerius, his eyes narrowing with a terrifying, cold fury. The mark of a traitor was not on her. It was on him. The moon's silence wasn't a warning about her bloodline. It was a shield protecting a daughter of a sacred line from bonding with an unworthy alpha. He took a step from behind the table, his gaze locked on mine, intense and searing. The full, catastrophic weight of his mistake, of his misinterpretation 5 years ago, crashed down upon him. He had thought the goddess was punishing him with a cursed mate, but the truth was infinitely more damning. The goddess had simply found him wanting. The chamber was utterly silent, the air thick with revelation. Varian's voice, when he finally spoke, was a raw, broken whisper that was more powerful than any roar. "It was never a curse," he said. His eyes filled with 5 years of unbearable regret. "It was a shield, and I was not worthy to stand behind it." The silence in the council chamber was a living thing, a suffocating pressure that pressed in on all sides. My words, and Varian's subsequent soul-shattering revelation, hung in the air, displacing all the oxygen. The elders stared, their ancient faces a mixture of shock, awe, and dawning comprehension. They were not looking at a rogue female anymore. They were looking at the living embodiment of their goddess's will, a woman the moon herself had seen fit to shield. Valerius was the color of old parchment, his lips a bloodless line of disbelief and terror, his carefully constructed web of lies, woven from twisted history and superstition, had been utterly annihilated. He had sought to use the goddess as his weapon, and in doing so had exposed himself as a blasphemer. Varian's gaze never left mine. The regret in his eyes was a vast, barren landscape, a chasm of wasted years and unforgivable failure. The iron mask of the king was gone, shattered. In its place was the raw, agonized face of a mate who has just realized he threw away his own soul. He had not been denied a blessing, he had failed a test. And the price of that failure was the 5 years I had suffered, the 5 years he had lost with his son. He took another step toward me, his hand reaching out, not in command, but in a hesitant, trembling plea. Before he could speak, Valerius, cornered and desperate, let out a choked, furious sound. Lies! A convenient reinterpretation. She twists the histories to suit her own. He never finished the sentence. Varian moved. It was not the calculated strike of a king, but the fluid, inescapable blur of an apex predator. He crossed the space between them in a heartbeat. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He backhanded Valerius across the face. It was not a slap, but a blow of pure, controlled alpha power. The crack echoed off the stone walls like a breaking bone. Valerius crumpled to the floor, a whimper of pain and shock escaping his lips, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Varian stood over him, a looming mountain of righteous fury. His voice, when he spoke, was deathly quiet, a razor's edge in the absolute silence. You invoked the conclave of judgment, Varian said, each word a chip of ice. So you shall have it. He turned his head slightly, his silver gaze sweeping over the terrified, silent elders. Lord Valerius, for the crime of bearing false witness against the mother of the royal heir, for the crime of twisting sacred law to serve your own ambition, and for the ultimate blasphemy of misrepresenting the will of the moon goddess to your alpha, you are hereby judged. He crouched down, grabbing a fistful of Valerius's robes and hauling him halfway to his feet. I strip you of your rank. I strip you of your seat on this council. I strip you of your voice in the affairs of this kingdom. You are no longer Lord Valerius. You are nothing. You are no one. He threw the old wolf back to the floor. You are exiled. You will be escorted to the blighted borders at dawn. If you ever set foot in my lands again, your life is forfeit. That is my judgment. Valerius stared up, his face a mask of ruined pride. You cannot. I can, Varian stated, his power absolute. And I have. He turned his back on the broken wolf, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. He looked to the elders. Does any other member of this council wish to question my decree, or the legitimacy of my son, or the honor of his mother? One by one the elders rose from their seats, and one by one they bowed. It was not the perfunctory bow of subjects to a king. It was a bow of deep, profound reverence. They bowed to their alpha, and then, their eyes shifting to me, they bowed to the will of their goddess. Leave us, Varian commanded. The elders filed out silently, not daring to meet his eyes. The guards hauled a sputtering, defeated Valerius from the chamber. The great doors boomed shut, leaving Varian and me alone. In the vast, echoing room, the silence that fell was different. It was no longer charged with political tension, but with 5 years of unspoken personal pain. He stood there, in the center of the room that represented his power, looking utterly broken by it. Orlina, he whispered, my name a wound on his lips. I didn't answer. I wrapped my arms around myself, a feeble defense against the storm of emotion that was threatening to drown me. He walked toward me slowly, as one would approach a wounded, unpredictable animal. He stopped a few feet away, close enough for me to feel the heat of him, to smell the scent of ozone and his deep, personal regret. I was a coward, he said, his voice raw, stripped of all artifice. You were right. I was not strong enough. I let Valerius and the others fill my head with talk of curses and bad omens because I was afraid. afraid of the other clans, afraid of a succession war, afraid of looking weak. He finally met my gaze, and the agony in his eyes was so profound it made my own heart ache in betrayal. I chose my crown over my soul, and I have been paying for it every day since. You think you paid for it? I asked, my voice trembling with a grief so deep it felt bottomless. I was the one who walked out of the great hall alone, with the whispers of the pack like knives in my back. I was the one who faced the winter with nothing but the clothes I was wearing and a life growing inside me. I was the one who held our son when he was sick with fever, praying to a silent goddess to spare him, because I had no one else to pray to. Your payment was a quiet conscience in a warm castle. Mine was terror in the dark. Tears I had refused to shed for 5 years burned my eyes. Each word was a stone I had carried, and I was finally laying them at his feet. He didn't flinch from my words. He absorbed them, let them cut him as they were meant to. He took a step closer, and then he did something that shattered the last of my defenses. The Alpha King, the ruler of all clans, Varian Croven, sank to one knee before me. He bowed his head, a gesture of such complete and utter submission it stole the breath from my lungs. I cannot take back the cold, he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. I cannot erase the fear. I can never give you back those years. All I can do, Kaito, is offer you the rest of mine. He looked up at me from the floor, his silver eyes shimmering with a vulnerability I had never imagined possible. I am not asking for your forgiveness, Orlena. I have not earned it. I am begging for a chance to become the male the moon knew I was not then. Let me be a father to our son. Let me be a mate to you, not because of a bond or a prophecy, but because I choose it. Because I choose you above my counsel, above my kingdom, above my own pride. His words were not a command. They were a plea. He was laying his power, his crown, his very soul at my feet and giving me the choice. My own tears finally fell, silent tracks on my dirty cheeks. The anger that had been my shield for so long had been washed away by his absolute surrender, leaving only a deep, hollow ache of loss for what we could have been, and a fragile, terrifying flicker of hope for what we still could be. I reached out a trembling hand and laid it on his shoulder. At my touch, a tremor ran through his entire body. He closed his eyes, leaning into my touch like a dying man finding water, and then I felt it. The cold void, the wall of ice that had slammed down between us all those years ago. It was still there, a faint phantom chill deep within my soul. It was the moon's shield. It's still there, I whispered, my voice breaking. The shield. His eyes snapped open, filled with a fresh wave of despair. Then she still finds me unworthy. No, I said, a dawning realization blooming in my heart. I looked down at the king kneeling before me, a male who had just publicly humbled himself, admitted his weakness, and chosen love over power. He was not the same alpha he had been 5 years ago. She doesn't find you unworthy. She is waiting for me. The shield was not just to protect me from him. It was to protect me from a bond I had not chosen. It was to give me the ultimate power, the final say. The goddess was not waiting for him to be worthy. She was waiting for me to accept him, my choice, my will. That was the final key. Orlena, he breathed, his hope and fear a palpable thing between us. I knelt before him so we were face to face. I lifted my other hand, cupping his jaw, feeling the rough stubble against my palm. I looked into his eyes, into the depths of his soul, and I saw the truth. I saw his love, his regret, his unwavering devotion. I choose you, Varian, I whispered. The moment the words left my lips, it happened. The phantom chill did not just vanish, it shattered. It was an explosion of warmth, a tidal wave of pure golden power that flooded every part of my being. It was the light of 1,000 moons, the warmth of the summer sun, the roar of a river breaking through a dam. It poured from me into him, and from him into me. The bond, suppressed and denied for so long, flared into life with an intensity that made me cry out. It was everything. It was completion. It was homecoming. Varian gasped, his entire body shuddering as the blessing, so long withheld, finally washed over him. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a holy, reverent awe. He surged forward, his mouth finding mine in a kiss that was not about passion, but about absolution. It was a kiss of sorrow and joy, of endings and beginnings. It tasted of salt and wine and 5 years of unspeakable loneliness finally coming to an end. When he pulled back, his eyes were blazing with a silver light so bright it was almost white. He lowered his head, his gaze falling to the vulnerable curve of my neck. "Let me," he pleaded, his voice a ragged whisper. "Let me mark you, let me make you mine, before the goddess and all the world. Let me finish what we started." There was no fear left, no anger, only a deep, profound sense of rightness, of destiny finally finding its path. "Yes," I breathed. He lowered his head, his lips tracing a path of fire along my skin. And then, at the hollow where my neck met my shoulder, he bit down. The pain was sharp, electric, a bolt of lightning that shot through every nerve in my body. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated ecstasy. I felt the magic of the claiming mark sink into my very soul, a glowing silver seal that bound me to him to me forever. Our scents merged, our life forces intertwined, our souls snapping together into a single perfect whole. He lifted his head, his eyes glowing, a faint trickle of my blood on his lips. On my shoulder, a new mark pulsed with a soft, silvery light. The swirling pattern of a wolf curled around a crescent moon. I was his. He was mine. He pulled me into his arms, burying his face in my hair, holding me as if he would never let me go. I clung to him, finally allowing myself to feel the safety and rightness of his embrace. After a long moment, he pulled back just enough to look at me, a fierce, determined light replacing the vulnerability in his eyes. This was the king again, but a different king, a complete king. He stood pulling me to my feet with him. He looked toward the door, beyond which lay the keep, the kingdom, and the world that had tried to tear us apart. "Now," he said, his voice ringing with a new, unshakable authority, a power that came not just from a crown, but from a healed soul. He took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. "We go to our son, and then we introduce the kingdom to its prince, and to its queen." 3 full moons had waxed and waned, painting the kingdom in shades of silver. Spring had come to the capital, a riot of determined green, pushing through the cracks in the old stones of the keep. The scent of rain-washed earth and blossoming moon-petal flowers now mingled with the familiar aromas of wood smoke and beeswax. It was a scent of new beginnings. I stood on the balcony of our royal suite, the one I had once considered a gilded cage. A soft breeze, carrying the last chill of winter, rustled the leaves in the gardens below and toyed with the loose strands of my hair. A heavy fur, Varian's fur, was draped over my shoulders, carrying his constant, grounding scent of ozone and ancient stone. I was never without it now. On my shoulder, the claiming mark was a nest of intricate silvery scars, a permanent emblem of our bond that pulsed with a gentle warmth against my skin. It was a constant, comforting presence, a thrumming connection to Varian that stretched across miles. I could feel him now, down in the training yard, his focus absolute, his power a steady beacon. I could feel the pride radiating from him, and the faint underlying current of fierce paternal love. My gaze followed his. Below, in the center of the yard, was Elias. My son was no longer the shy, quiet boy from the forest. In 3 short months, he had transformed. He was still my sweet, gentle Elias, but now there was a confidence in his stance, a bright spark of curiosity in his eyes that had replaced the timid fear. He held a wooden practice sword, a miniature version of the one Varian wielded, and his small face was screwed up in concentration. Varian stood before him, not as a king, but as a father. He was patient, his voice a low, encouraging rumble as he corrected Elias's grip, adjusted his footing. He would lunge, and Elias would parry with a squeal of effort, the clash of wood on wood echoing in the crisp morning air. Then Varian would laugh, a deep, full-bodied sound that I had never heard before coming here. And he would scoop Elias up, tossing him into the air. Elias's shrieks of delight were the sweetest music I had ever known. They were healing. We were healing. The first few weeks had been a storm. Announcing Elias as the crown prince had sent shockwaves through the allied clans. Varian had met every challenge, every whisper of dissent, not with the brute force of his past, but with a new, unshakable authority. He did not command their loyalty. He earned it. He spoke of the will of the moon, of the sacred duty to a bloodline the goddess herself had shielded. He presented me not as a rogue he had reclaimed, but as the queen the goddess had chosen. The claiming mark on my shoulder, which I wore openly, was a testament to his words. It glowed with a divine light that silenced even the most skeptical of the clan lords. My own battle had been quieter, but no less fierce. I had to navigate the treacherous currents of the court. The ladies-in-waiting, who had first looked at me with scorn, now watched me with a mixture of fear and fascination. I did not play their games of whispers and veiled insults. I had spent 5 years learning a different language, the language of the forest, of survival, of truth. I met their sideways glances with a direct gaze. I answered their probing questions with simple, unadorned honesty. They did not know what to make of a queen who preferred trousers to gowns, who knew how to set a snare and track a deer, whose hands were calloused from work, not soft from idleness. Slowly, grudgingly, they began to respect me. My greatest allies were the elders from the council. They saw me as a conduit to their goddess, a living reminder of the old ways. They would seek me out in the gardens, asking me to interpret the flight of a raven or the pattern of frost on a window pane. They would listen, rapt, as I told them the forest lore my grandmother had taught me, stories they had long since forgotten. I was reconnecting them to the magic they had started to lose. I felt a presence behind me and smiled, not needing to turn. His scent had preceded him. Varian's arm slid around my waist, his chin coming to rest on my shoulder as he, too, watched our son in the yard below. He pressed a kiss to the claiming mark, and a shiver of pleasure and contentment ran through me. "He has your focus," Varian murmured, his voice a low vibration against my ear. "And my stubbornness. The training masters will have their hands full." "He is perfect," I replied softly, leaning my head back against his chest. We stood in comfortable silence, watching our son, our perfect union of wildness and royalty. "Do you miss it?" he asked after a long moment, his voice quiet, serious. "The forest, your freedom?" It was a question he had been afraid to ask, and one I had spent many nights pondering. I thought of the wild, tangled woods, the crisp silence of a winter morning, the fierce, lonely independence that had defined me for so long. "I miss the quiet sometimes," I admitted, but I was never truly free. I was always running, always looking over my shoulder, always afraid. I turned in his arms to face him, my hands coming to rest on the solid wall of his chest. I looked up into his silver eyes, eyes that now held no shadows, only a deep and abiding love for me and our son. "This," I said, my voice thick with an emotion that still felt new and overwhelming. "Being with you, with Elias, knowing he is safe, knowing we are safe. This is freedom, Varian. You are my freedom." A look of profound relief and adoration washed over his face. He bent his head, capturing my lips in a kiss that was slow and deep and full of promises kept. It was no longer a kiss of desperation or regret, but of a deep, settled peace. When he pulled away, he kept my hands in his. "I have something for you," he said, a rare, boyish excitement in his eyes. "Come." He led me not back into the keep, but down a winding path in the garden I had not explored before. It led to an old, forgotten gate, tangled with overgrown ivy. Varian produced a heavy iron key and opened it. Beyond was not more manicured lawn, but a stretch of wild, untamed land that bordered the castle walls. Tall grasses swayed in the breeze, ancient oaks spread their gnarled branches, and a small, clear stream tumbled over mossy rocks. It smelled of damp earth and wild things. It smelled like home. In the center of the clearing stood a small, beautifully crafted stone cottage, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. "What is this?" I breathed, my heart beginning to pound. "The capital can be suffocating," Varian said, watching my face intently. "I know you need the wild, a place to breathe, a place that is yours alone." He squeezed my hand. "It is yours, Orlina, a sanctuary. Whenever the stone walls feel too close, you can come here, you and Elias, or just you." Tears welled in my eyes. It was the most thoughtful, most perfect gift he could have possibly imagined. He had not just claimed me, he had seen me. He understood the wild part of my soul, and instead of trying to tame it, he had given it a place to bloom. He led me inside. It was simple and rustic, with a large stone hearth, comfortable wooden furniture, and shelves filled not with scrolls of statecraft, but with books on herbal lore and ancient legends. Lying on the main table, nestled on a bed of soft moss, was a new moonstone amulet. It was not the ornate kingly piece he had given me years ago, but a simple, smooth, silver-gray stone, polished by a river's current, bound in simple leather. It felt warm to the touch, humming with a quiet, natural magic. "For you," he said softly, "not a key to a bond, but a reminder of who you are, the lady of the wilds, the guardian of the moon cairns, my queen." I picked it up, its weight familiar and right in my palm. I slipped it over my head, the stone coming to rest in the hollow of my throat. It felt like settling the last piece of my soul back into place. I turned to him, my heart too full for words, and threw my arms around his neck, pulling him down for a fierce, grateful kiss. Later, as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and rose, we sat on the porch of my cottage, watching Elias chase fireflies in the tall grass. He was laughing, his face alight with pure, unadulterated joy. A prince of the kingdom, playing in the heart of the wild. He was both, and he was whole. Just like his parents. Varian's arm was a warm, solid weight around my shoulders. I leaned into him, my head on his shoulder, the moonstone cool against my skin. The moon, a perfect silver sickle, began to rise over the tops of the trees. It was not silent tonight. It was singing, a soft celestial melody of love found, of family forged, of a bond once shielded, now blessed. I was no longer the rejected Luna. I was no longer the mother hiding in secret. I was Orlina Croven, queen of the Alpha King, mother of the Crown Prince. I had walked through the fire of rejection and emerged not burned, but forged. My past was not a stain to be washed away, but the wild, thorny ground from which my new life had finally, beautifully bloomed.